There is no problem in the connection, connectivity. Just check. Fine. I just request all of you to mute your systems, and so that there won't be any disturbance during the class, right? All of you, please mute yourselves. Anything you have to, you can put in the chat box there. So welcome today's biochemistry class. Myself, Dr. Nilima N Dongre, Associate Professor in the Department of Biochemistry from the BLD family. I welcome you all to today's class, where we are trying to understand what is the biochemical basis of life. All of you already know. I just request once again to mute yourself. All of you can hear me. Please mute yourself. Still, I am hearing one or two noises. Okay. So today we will try to understand what is the biochemical basis of life. So what is life exactly? All of us in your PU courses, you have come across many chemical and physical terminologies, terms. Then you have learned about the various chemical elements, compounds, bonds. And now we will try to understand how they can be or they are necessary for our life. So we can say that life is all about the bag of biochemical reactions. It is the interaction between the different elements, molecules, by formation of the interaction between these two compounds through the chemical bonds. So we should basically, in little bit, we will try to understand about these atoms, molecules, though it is already known to you. Just I will revise it here because it becomes integral part of the life and life's processes. So basically we should understand what are these elements, how they are formed with atoms, molecules, and the chemical bonds involved in that. Then we come to the important aspect, that is the significance of water in the life processes and for our life. And then we will try to understand about an element that is basically involved in the organic chemistry, that is the carbon, and along with other elements like hydrogen, nitrogen, and these are the elements which form the organic matter in the living systems. So, and ultimately we will come to the hierarchy, in the hierarchy to the macromolecules, or we call them as a larger polymeric forms, which are formed from the simpler monomeric units, and ultimately they are the players in the life processes. So these biomolecules are carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and important proteins. So the diverse group of these biomolecules is the basis for life. So we will try to, just I will recall yourself or revise the things that you have already learned. So in the chemistry of life, we have to learn that all the living things are made up of cells, and all cells are made up of a set of molecules known as the biochemicals. So there are basically two different types of biochemicals, or the substances, that are the small inorganic molecules like water and ions, salt ions, and large organic molecules such as sugars, fats, proteins, and DNA. So difference between these organic compounds and inorganic compounds are, these organic molecules are containing the atoms of elements like carbon, basically we have to concentrate there as a carbon. And organic molecules are primarily, they are composed of the combinations of number of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. In addition to that, it has got phosphorus also in their structures. Now, what is biochemistry? So far, you have been learning different aspects of the subjects like anatomy, physiology. So, in anatomy, you have to learn, or you will be learning the study of structures. Physiology is the study of functions, whereas biochemistry integrates both these aspects. It describes the structure and function of living things in molecular terms. So, we will be understanding the integration, how the structural and functional aspects of life are molded together, and that is what is the basis for biochemistry. That we have to understand. Ultimately, we are going to learn about what is the chemical basis of the life. That is what is we are trying to understand today. So, as I have already told you, basically these 6 elements, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, along with the sulfur, they form the living matter. These elements together constitute about 90% of the dry weight of the human body. Several other functionally important elements are also found in cells, and they include calcium, potassium, sodium, chloride, magnesium, iron, copper, cobalt, iodine, zinc, fluoride, molybdenum, and selenium. You have heard of these names of the elements, and we call them as the trace elements. Now, while we learn the organization of these elements or molecules together for the formation of a living system, we can go in the order from atom to molecule, molecule or compound will form organelle, organelle will form cell, cell combination together will form the tissues. Number of tissues together will lead to the formation of an organ. Collection of organs in well organized matter will lead to organ systems, and as a whole, it will form a complete organism. So, even human beings are from cells, tissues, organ systems, and ultimately the human being. So, this level of organization, so these atoms are defined as the smallest units of an element that still maintains the property of that element. So they are the miniatures of the elements. They will be having all the properties of that element. So basically they are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. This molecular level includes the atoms combined to form molecules which can have entirely different properties that the atom they contain. So when the combinations of different atoms come together, it will exist in the molecular level, and that will have different functions than that of the basic element. And that examples can be water, DNA, carbohydrates, etc. Next comes the cell. Cell are the smallest unit of life. Cells are enclosed by a membrane or cell wall, and in multicellular organisms often perform the specific function. So this membrane will form different. These cells have got different functions. But muscle cells, skin cells, neurons. So these muscular cells, they will have the function of contraction, relaxation. Skin cell will have different functions. Like that, this function is specific to that particular cell. Tissues are groups of cells with similar functions. So that comes the next level, that is tissue. A combination of muscle cells together will form muscles, and so on and so forth. Organs are 2 or more types of tissues that work together to complete a specific task. So heart, you can say, is an organ. Liver, they have got their own functions. and combined together. An organ system is a group of organs that carries out more generalized set of functions. So that is the organ system. Digestive, circulatory, you have come across all this, excretory, renal system, then reproductive system of living beings. So all this you have come across, and ultimately it leads to the formation of an organism which has several organ systems that function together. And we can take ourselves, humans are the completely organized system of these organ systems, and that will lead to the complete organism. So this is the, we can say, level of organization starting from atom, molecule, cell, tissue, organ system, and as a whole complete functional organism will be taking place. Now let us recall or revise some terms that will be used here. What is matter? So the many things are made up of, all the things are made up of matter. So this matter, it has got mass, it takes up space, and it is made up of atoms. So basically, matter has got mass, shape, and it is made up of atoms. And the atoms are the smallest part of an element that still has the properties of that element. So you can see here, these are the different matters, which by the definition we can say it has got mass, it will occupy some space, and made up of atoms. So, and the atom is the smallest part of an element. So all of you know the structure of an atom containing proton, neutron in the nucleus, and these electrons are orbiting around the nucleus. So the protons and neutrons are approximately of the same size, whereas electrons are of much smaller size. You have come across the term of periodic table, which is depending on the atomic number and atomic mass. So at this example, it is helium, which occupies the second position, atomic number 2, symbol, and atomic mass is like this. Now, here is a term called as the isotopes. So these isotopes, they are the same elements, but with different numbers of neutrons. So we have got the examples of these isotopes of carbon. Carbon 12, carbon 13, these are the isotopes of this carbon, you can say. Some of these isotopes will have the property of radiation itself. So they are called as the radioactive isotopes, which has got the link in the medical field. So this carbon 12 is a non-radioactive. Carbon 13 isotope is non-radioactive, whereas carbon 14 exhibits the radioactive property. So the isotopes of carbon, I can say, they are 12, 13, and 14. Carbon 12, carbon 13, carbon 14. So protons number remains same, 6. Here in 13, it is 7. Neutrons are 7. Whereas in carbon 14, it is neutrons are 8. So the mass numbers are differing here. Mass number 12, mass number 13, mass number 14, and that makes it an isotope of the carbon. Out of these, the carbon 14 is a radioactive isotope of carbon, right? So this is now how these radioactive isotopes are connected in your life. These, I can say, the radioactive isotopes are helpful as well as harmful to the animal. Helpful in the sense we can explore these, or they are being utilized for the diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. And harmful, the prolonged use of these, or when we come across the radiations, they will, in long term, they will have the adverse effects on the life. All of us know the tragedy that has taken place in this thing, Japan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. You might have come across in the historical aspects. Still, after so many years, the people living there, they are finding the adverse effects of those radiations. Now, so living cells cannot distinguish between the isotopes of the same elements. So therefore, radioactive compounds in metabolic processes can act as a tracer. So we are exploiting, or you can say, during research and diagnostics, these radioactive isotopes have been utilized. So they can be used for carbon dating. You might have heard these terms. So they are the tracers in the metabolic processes. That is how we can understand what is the metabolism, how the metabolic pathways take place. It is with the help of these radioactive isotopes only. So this radioactivity can be detected by the instruments. Using these instruments, the fate of radioactive tracers can be monitored in the living organisms. So that is why, that is how we can say it is both way. Radioactive isotopes can be useful as well as harmful to the body. So radioactive tracers are frequently used in medical diagnosis. Sophisticated imaging instruments are used to detect them. So the imaging instrument that uses positron emission tomography, that is PET, detects the location of injected radioactive materials. Now, you might have heard this term, positron emission tomography. So this will help in useful for the diagnosing heart disorders, cancers, and it is helpful in the brain research also. So this is the use of radioisotopes in the technology. So using these radioactive isotopes, you can have the sophisticated imaging instruments like PET. So this is how you might have seen in movies and serials, you come across this. So this is PET scanning. The picture will appear. The patient will enter the diagnostic chamber, and then you can get the image, and from that you can diagnose whether the organ is having any abnormality or not. So this is the difference you can see here. Healthy person's brain will look like this. On PET scan, Alzheimer's patient will look like this. So looking at the images, we can confirm, or the clinicians will be able to diagnose the disorders. So in addition to benefits, there are also dangers associated with the radioactive substances. So uncontrolled exposure can cause damage to some molecules in the living cells, especially the DNA. And the chemical bonds are broken by the emitted energy, which causes abnormal bonds to form. And that is what is the mutation. That mutations will lead to cancerous conditions. So here it can be helpful for the diagnosis of the cancers, as well as excess exposure will lead to the change in the DNA structure, and it will lead to the mutations. So energy levels of the atom, that is determined by the shells. So atoms have the 7 shells, all of you know that. Atoms are stable when outer shell is complete. So this basic, you know, and the electron shows the valence in the outer shell. Now we'll come together further. An important aspect is formation of the chemical bonds that are involved in the life processes. So ionic bonds, covalent bonds, they are the basic bonds in the many biochemical compounds or biomolecules. So ions forms when atoms gain or lose an electron. That is why in the outer shell, depending on the number of electrons in the outer shell, it will either take up the electron or lose the electron, and that is basically by the opposite charged ions attract to form an ionic bond. So all of you know these basics of the physical chemistry. What is seen here? Chloride has got 7 electrons in the outer shell, whereas sodium has got only one. So a sodium easily gives its ion, and there will be formation of sodium chloride. So by the ionic bonds. Whereas the other bond that is involved is covalent bond. Covalent bonds are more stable. So atoms share the electrons, and thus there is formation of a covalent bonds which are more stable. The example of an ionic bond, the ion valency electron of a sodium, that is what just now we have seen here. And you get sodium chloride ion. The covalent bond. Now here we have to understand the formation or the role of this carbon. Carbon has 4 valency electrons that can pair up with 4 hydrogen to make methane. So carbon can combine with 4 different molecules. So this is what is the important property of the carbon. You will be further learning in many biomolecules basics how this carbon is going to link to different compounds, giving the properties of isomerism and all these things. It is basically dependent on this capability of the carbon to bind with the 4 different molecules. So carbon has 4 valence electrons that can pair up with 4 hydrogen to make methane. So this is the simple example. Water is formed by covalent bonds. All of you know, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, they will form together a water molecule by covalent bond formation. Next terms, molecules versus compounds. So the molecules are formed when 2 or more atoms join together chemically. That is, oxygen, 2 same atoms are joining together. So it becomes a molecule. Whereas a compound, a type of molecule that contains at least 2 different elements. So here the difference between molecule and compound is these are the linking between 2 similar atoms. This is the linking between 2 different elements. And this helps in the formation, making, breaking of the different compounds. So the chemical reactions involve the processes that changes one chemical into the another, and with the help of breaking or forming new bonds, chemical bonds. So this is the synthetic and hydrolytic reactions, you can say, or breaking and making, which will be utilized in terms of the metabolism, that is anabolism and catabolism. So formation of new compounds, whereas depletion of the compounds for the energy purposes and meeting the cell's requirement, this is continuously going on inside the cell, making and breaking of the bonds, and that is what is the biochemical reactions are taking place. So far we have understood the major elements in the human body, that is hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. So 99% of the total atoms. This is the percentage of each of them. Whereas another minerals, they comprise about 0.7% of the totals: calcium, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, sodium, magnesium, chlorine, and the trace elements, iron, iodine, copper, zinc, and they are in the smaller quantities of the total ions. Also, they are called as the minor elements or trace elements. This I have taken from your textbook of Biochemistry by Rafi, latest edition of that textbook. Now, these trace elements we are found in many food and water additives. So these trace elements are required to prevent the diseases. That is why, though their requirement is in the smaller quantity, but if we lack them in our diet, they are going to have the different consequences in the form of diseases. So these elements form a basis of life again. So, for example, without iron, the body cannot transport the oxygen. So, iron is an important trace element. Another example, all of we have come across, we come in the advertisements and our iodized salt and all. Why it is necessary? Because the deficiency of iodine will result in the production, less production of the thyroid hormones, and that ultimately results in the goiter. You can see the enlargement of this thyroid due to deficiency of iodine. And thus, though these elements, along with the major 6 elements or macro elements, these stress elements are also important for the life processes. So thus we have seen elements, atoms, compounds form with the help of chemical bonds. They will result in formation of the compounds. One of the example, water, which is the life's support. So this water has a number of special properties that make it both an essential matrix and essential ingredient for biochemical processes. Water molecule is composed, we all know, that is with the help of covalently bound hydrogen with oxygen. It is polar, and in water, the two hydrogen atoms are not located in opposite sides of the oxygen, but instead are both on one side, forming the angle of 104.45 degrees. So this water has a tendency to form ions. One hydrogen splits off, leaving behind its electrons. So positive ion, that is H plus, and negative hydroxyl ions are formed. So these ions are constantly available to participate in any biochemical reaction that might take place in the water solution. So it is the base of all the, so 90% is the water inside the living system, and that is going to determine the basis for biochemical reaction in the form of protons as well as these negatively charged hydroxyl ions, and that an excess of protons will give the pH acidity, or you can say acidic pH, whereas excess hydroxyl will give the basic pH. So acids and bases, the pH of the living systems or different body fluids is important for the normal biochemical reactions, and that is ultimately determined by the protons and hydroxyl ions concentration. So you should also know about the concept of pH. So the scale of pH ranges from 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. So most of the body fluids, or we can say blood, having this non-neutral pH. Then saliva, other body fluid, gastric juice, they have got different pH. So that helps in the easy functioning of the biomolecules like enzymes located in that compartment, and that helps in the digestion, absorption, detoxification processes. So all these things are ultimately dependent on the proton or acidity and alkalinity of that particular body fluid. So coming to the major classes of biomolecules that serve the building blocks for the larger molecules. So we have been hearing this carbon, hydrogen, now nitrogen. Apart from that, so these elements together will form these basic molecules called as carbohydrates, lipids, amino acids. They're ultimately going to lead to proteins, nucleic acids, and others are important chemical compounds are vitamins. So carbohydrates examples will be glucose, fructose, mainly used as a sources for cellular energy. Apart from that, even they are useful structurally. Lipids, commonly known as fats, they are organic compounds that are not very water soluble, or you can say water insoluble, used as a source of cellular energy. Components of cell membranes. Amino acids altogether 20 are found in living systems, and they are used as a building blocks of proteins. These proteins are both structurally and functionally important. They have got diverse functions in the body system: defense, then biocatalyst, transport, structural. All these are basically made up of proteins. Nucleotides, they are the building blocks of DNA and RNA, which is a hereditary material. And apart from that, some compounds which are a diverse group of the biomolecules and necessary for the life, we comprise them, or we know, or we call them as the vitamins. They are amines of life actually, but they are the diverse group of the biomolecules which are necessary for proper growth and development. So this is another important compound. Then comes the heme. It is organometallic compound containing iron, important for transport of oxygen in the bloodstream. So these things will be dealt in detail during your regular classes. So we are going to understand the chemistry, classification, function, role, everything, all the aspects of these biomolecules in detail during your regular classes or following classes of the each biomolecule. So this is how they are formed from the monomeric units like monosaccharides, fatty acids, glycerols, lipid, proteins, amino acids, nucleic acid, DNA, RNA form from the nucleotides containing the purine and pyrimidine bases, that is adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine, DNA. Replacing this ribose is replaced by deoxyribose. So all these basic things, all of you know, just I'm here to revise you. We are going to learn them in depth in the following classes. So far, we have understood the basics of the elements that are necessary for the life. Am I right? So now let us move together the process of what exactly is the life. So it is the phenomena, following phenomena are all or mostly exhibited by the forest healthy life. All these phenomena have to be exhibited by the organism. So these include homeostasis, organization, metabolism, growth, adaptation, response to stimuli, reproduction, hereditary molecule, that is important one, which is that is DNA. So this basis of the life